I have my fingers crossed. I'm tapping wood, and sure enough, we're on YouTube now. So,
Awesome.
um, got it, and I'll start admitting people. I have my
Okay.
fingers crossed. I'm tapping wood. All right, it's there. I've turned off YouTube so we don't have the echo.
Catalog, and most of them are real original catalog, so I haven't been.
Welcome, everyone, as people start to trickle in. Let me see. Okay, I think we'll get started to make sure we have enough time. Let me see. Just open the chat. Okay. Hi, my name is Peggy Greisinger. I work at the University of Notre Dame Hesburgh Libraries, and I'm going to be the moderator for this session. Welcome to the session, Official RDA and BIBFRAME. The session is being live streamed to the LD4 YouTube channel and recorded and will be saved on YouTube for future viewing. Let me see, be sure to check out the useful resources on this intro slide, including our code of conduct, how to join the conference Slack, the tech support channel in Slack, and the Twitter hashtag. You can ask questions using the Zoom chat in this meeting, and also by using the raise hand function. Let's see. Now, to introduce this session, our speaker today is Paul Frank. Paul is a cataloging policy specialist in the policy. Oops, let me go. Excuse me. Paul is a cataloging policy specialist in the Policy Training and Cooperative Programs Division at the Library of Congress. Paul works with the Program for Cooperative Cataloging Secretariat to fulfill the mission of the PCC. One of the PCC's missions is to create supporting cataloging documentation for the official RDA toolkit, and Paul co-chaired with colleague Clara Leah the creation of the PCC metadata guidance documentation that will be used in conjunction with the LC PCC policy statements when cataloging under official RDA. Paul is also a trainer for the Library of Congress BibFrame pilot and has served in this role since 2015. Today, this hands-on tutorial will introduce the official RDA toolkit and its supporting documentation, the Library of Congress Program for Cooperative Cataloging Policy Statements, and the metadata guidance documentation, specifically as they might be applied in a BibFrame cataloging environment. So let me stop my share. Sorry, so many pop-ups coming up. Okay, and then Paul, feel free to take it away.
Peggy, that's great. Hi, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Peggy and Jim Hahn and Steve Folsom at Cornell for facilitating this session and for giving me the chance to talk to you all. And I want to thank you all for joining this session. I don't know how to define this. I want it to be an open session, so I'm encouraging people to chat during the presentation, raise points, ask questions. I also don't intend this to be a workshop. This is actually a view into the future of what might be. And actually, I'm afraid to say that future is maybe closer than a lot of us think, but it's an exciting time that we're in, and I hope I can share some of that excitement with you. Okay, here are my slides. I'm going to share them. I didn't add them to the portal yet, but I definitely am going to do that. I can do that after the session today. So I'm here to talk about official RDA and BibFrame. Now, unfortunately, there are always some losers when you talk about something new, and you're gonna find out, at least from my point of view, the big loser here is Mark. And I'm going to try to be as kind as I can, but Mark has been a problem for BIBFRAME and for RDA. Nonetheless, we are moving forward with official RDA, and we have a lot of work that's already gone into creating documentation that we can use to make the transition from original RDA that we're using now to official RDA. And I'm, as Peggy said, I want to talk a little bit about some of that documentation, but also I want to really let BIBFRAME stand on its own. And BIBFRAME up until now has been so dependent on Mark that I feel that Mark has limited our understanding of both RDA and BIBFRAME. And so I wanted to have a day or an hour just to talk about what the possibilities will be, or what kind of world we might live in when we don't have the legacy of Mark holding us back. So as I said, official RDA is the future, and it's pretty close. We are testing it right now. We have developed all the documentation that we're going to be using to catalog using official RDA. We have a test ongoing that will look at things and how does everything come together? How does all the documentation work together? So we're on the way, but all of the testing that we're doing is in Mark for official RDA. Mark is the lingua franca of cataloging still, and Ferber. And you can substitute or add, in addition to Ferber, LRM, which is the model behind official RDA. Ferber, LRM, original RDA, not easy to express in Mark. It just does not display or does not make a semantic sense when you look at it in a flat Mark record. So the phrase that I don't think I really made it up, but it certainly isn't I don't think the word inexpressivity is actually, if you look it up, I got the underline in PowerPoint telling me that, we can't find a substitution for this word. But what I'm getting at here, and I'm sure you understand this, is Mark has ontological inexpressivity. You can look at a Mark record, and if I asked you to identify elements from certain entities, I think you might be hard pressed to be able to do that. And Ferber has what I consider some built-in inconsistencies when we look at the modeling of works and expressions. And so we're in this world where, okay, Mark is not going to help us identify entities very well. Ferber has some things that aren't quite right, and although LRM has solved a lot of those, but this is the world that we're in right now. So the question that I have to you, and this is one that every cataloger must have thought about, is if you're taught when you're learning Ferber and original RDA that a work is an abstract entity, okay? It's the idea in a person's head. And it doesn't become real until it's expressed and manifested, right? So, but at the work level, it's abstract. Well, how can you say a work is abstract, but then in a bibliographic description, you're making a reference to that as a physical entity or as something distinct? And this is a problem from modeling, and Mark has allowed us to do this without really causing us to stop and think about it. So what are we cataloging? If you're in Mark and you sit down, you just, you put the main entry, you put the title, you put the publication information, edition statement, but the things that go into a cataloging record. But are you actually thinking about what types of elements those are? Are you describing a work? Are you describing an expression? Are you describing a manifestation? These are all RDA terms, right? Are you doing all three? you're probably doing all three, but you're just mashing them all together into one flat MARC record. So my question is, did PCC make a mistake in allowing the conflation between work and expression? And I think PCC did make a mistake. And this has caused lots of problems. And I think it needs to be solved before we get to official RDA. So those of you who know me well know that I always harp on this one LC PCC PS, but to me, this is an example of many of how our guidance in PCC to deal with original RDA does not acknowledge the structure of RDA or FRBR. So you probably have seen this one. It's if I use official RDA speak, which I need to start doing, this is a parallel aggregate resource, and we have a translation and an original language in one resource, in one aggregate resource, one compilation, I guess we call it, before official RDA takes place. So it's in MARC, here's the MARC record. Okay, so you can, if you're a cataloger, even if you just have a passing knowledge of cataloging, you can probably figure out what's going on here. So you have a creator, you have one title, I'll just call it a title. You have what looks like a second title because it has an equal sign and ISBD, and that means what follows is another in the same entity, but a different label. And you have a statement of responsibility. Okay, great, this is wonderful. But now look at this. 2 700 fields, and MARC says, oh, well, this second indicator 2 means that whatever follows is contained in the resource that we're cataloging. So in this resource. So what do we have here? Well, mail carrier Spanish. So you might think, well, I guess these two entities, we don't know what they are. Can you put them into a class? No, can't do it. These are somehow related to this compilation. And the 2 here says they're a part of that compilation. So they're within the compilation. But where is all the FRBR? What's going on with FRBR? What's going on with the original RDA here? There's a lot of stuff that's left out of this example, and it really bothers me that we're using this as an official policy statement. I'll try not to be too cruel about it, but why is this example not like this? Why isn't English added here to show that this is an English language expression? If we don't have English and we don't have anything like we had in the previous example here, this could be represent the work. This could represent the expression in the original language. But if the work is an abstract entity, how can you say that a resource includes an abstract entity? So we've created so much confusion by saying, well, I don't know, this is either the work or the work in the original language, or the expression in the original language. It's either a work or expression. I'm not sure. Does it make any difference? Sure, it makes a difference. It makes a huge difference from a modeling standpoint, but we've conflated the 2. And I think this was a big mistake that PCC has made. And BIBFRAME pointed out the fallacy of doing this. BIBFRAME is like a lie detector. MARC will let anything pass. BIBFRAME, when you start looking at the modeling of BIBFRAME, these things will not work. So I have a problem with this. I think we should have English to represent the original language expression of this work. And then in addition, the example doesn't even include relationship designators. And my assertion is that the reason it doesn't include relationship designators is because it would prove that this is a bad example. So this is what we would use in original RDA. This is a whole part relationship. In official RDA, it's a different type of relationship, but for original, it's whole part. So we would use container of. But what entity do you put here? It's container of expression, right? it can't be container of work because work is abstract. It's impossible for me to picture a scenario where you would have an abstract entity in a work. So in a compilation. So if I asked you what you would put here, expression or work, most people are going to put work. Most people are going to put work here. And that's because it doesn't have the English. And then they would say, well, the one with Spanish, that should be container of expression, because I know that we were taught that, you know, translations are expressions, right? So it would have container of expression and container of work. Well, the container of expression would be right, but container of work is not right at all. And so we've created a real, a horrible training example here. I mean, it's horrible until someone points out the fallacies of it, and now I think now it could be a good learning. It's a good learning example because of the errors that are in it. And then finally, are we ignoring a conflict here? If we're saying that this first entity here, that this contained in this expression that's contained in this resource doesn't have a language with it, aren't we creating an inherent conflict between a part of this resource and the comprehensive title of the resource? This access point, this authorized access point mail carrier, is identical to this one. So this is circular. This is not the way RDA is meant to be. So I believe that Mark, this type of these illogical relationships and this illogical interpretation of RDA is okay according to Mark. Mark is not pointing out anything that's saying this is not right. It's worked well since 2012, and that's when we first implemented RDA in the PCC. But based on my experience with the BIBFRAME pilot, and I'm very grateful to see so many LC pilot participants at this meeting today, because they know better than anyone that all of these practices that we see in Mark, according to RDA, original RDA, fall apart in BIBFRAME. So that mail carrier example, if I asked a BIBFRAME pilot participant to describe that resource in BIBFRAME, it would not work. You could not do it. So Mark, in my estimation, can prevent an understanding of RDA, or at least enable complacency. And so many people know Mark, and they probably don't go to RDA. They're letting Mark serve as a bridge to do things, to catalog by example, to catalog the way they've done cataloging under different codes, and the whole RDA part tends to be missing. So there is I'm not blaming anyone other than Mark, that our understanding of RDA, and I just mean original RDA, is clouded by our dependency on Mark and the flatness of Mark and Mark's inability to express semantic relationships very well. So BIBFRAME contrast is not going to allow this to happen. BIBFRAME forces you to reconcile the modeling and sort of reconcile the conflicting modeling because of RDA and LRM, Ferber modeling, and then BIBFRAME has its own modeling that then there's a happy medium between the two. BIBFRAME is, well, I think it should be clear that I believe BIBFRAME is a much better communications format for RDA, original RDA, but it also is for official RDA. And in fact, it's even, official RDA is even better for BIBFRAME and for linked data semantic, linked data semantics than original RDA, because some of those errors, or what I perceive as errors in original RDA, have been solved with the LRM, with official. I'm sorry, I might have said official, I meant original. Some of the errors in original RDA have been fixed in official RDA. And so the official RDA is so much better for BibFrame that at the Library of Congress, before we train catalogers in official RDA, once an implementation date is set, or if it is set, before we train them in official RDA, we're going to train them in BibFrame, so that they can see the semantics and not have it obfuscated by MARC. We will be cataloging in MARC, in official RDA, and in fact, all of the documentation that we've been working on for official RDA is really geared towards MARC cataloging. So let me show you. Let me try to get out of this session, and I want to show you something from official RDA. And what I'm going to do is I want to go to, I've created a profile in Marva, which is our linked data editor that we use at the Library of Congress for official RDA. And this is just a sandbox. This is a real sandbox, and I would love to get feedback from all of you on this. And this is certainly not exactly how it will ultimately be, but I just wanted to give an idea of the possibilities. So instead of the typical RDA terminology from original RDA that you would see, creator of work or creator, I've used the semantics from official RDA, creator, agent of work. And what I've done is provide, well, I can't take credit for this. I created the profile, but I'm very grateful to Matt Miller at the Library of Congress, who actually pushed the profile to Marva, so we can play around with it here. But we have links here that go right to the official RDA toolkit. So here is entities, work, creator, agent of work. You can read all about it here. If you haven't looked at official RDA yet, this might be a good little brief tour for you, because you'll see the format is so much different from original RDA. But we have a statement about this entity here. This is an entity, creator, agent of work, definition and scope, gives information about how it could be used. But then more importantly, let's see if I can minimize this. Yeah, the LCPCCPSs align with the instructions in official RDA. So they're an integral part of the toolkit. Not like we have in original RDA where you have to go out of the toolkit, or you're actually still in the toolkit, but you go to a separate file of documents. These documents are integrated into the toolkit itself, and this is the policy statement. And you can see from the, and I'm sure you've seen this in other presentations, just because of the architecture of this type of architecture definitely does limit the amount of data that you can put into a policy statement, because it can only be as long as the instruction is here, right, for this entity. So what has happened is that the policy statement tends to be rather brief, but then it will refer to, let me go down, I think it's a little bit further here. It will refer to metadata guidance documents. And those are an entirely different set of documents that are actually housed outside of the toolkit. And these were developed by a very, I can't come up with the right adjectives, but a very impressive group of PCC members and Library of Congress staff members to create documents that really help you interpret official RDA. Because I'll be honest with you, if you are not familiar with the vocabulary, the syntax of official RDA, reading some of these can be very off-putting. but the metadata guidance documents actually help interpret this for you and make it a little bit easier to understand. So we have a complete set of documentation, and we're going through this RDA test now for official RDA. I maintain, based on my confidence and the work that's been done so far here between PCC and the Library of Congress to get the documentation in place, that most catalogers would be able to start cataloging in official RDA today with using these tools. I mean, there's documents that still need to be refined and developed, but the underpinnings are all there for cataloging to take place today in official RDA. But what is the cataloging communication format? It's MARC. This is all meant for MARC cataloging. So what is unfortunate is that when all of this documentation was created, the charge or the goal was to be able to catalog in official RDA just as we do in original RDA. So that means that it was a bridge from the original to official. It made a lot of sense because it has to be done in steps. You learn a tool and then you learn how that tool can work in other ways. You don't want to learn them both at the same time. That would be overwhelming. To learn a new way to do things and do things a different way at the same time would be totally, it could be really daunting. And so I understand the decision to only replicate cataloging practices and policies as they are now in official RDA. But unfortunately, what was deferred were all of these wonderful improvements in official RDA that make so much more sense in linked data and express the modeling behind LRM so well. So what I'd like to, and my closing comment on this is that as a big proponent of BIBFRAME in the metadata guidance documents, all of us actually, wasn't just I, but all of us who worked on the metadata guidance documents saw the importance of including BIBFRAME examples. So you won't see only BIBFRAME examples, you'll always see MARC examples, and then in many cases, you'll see a BIBFRAME example to go along with the MARC example. So we're sort of getting there. But in terms of BIBFRAME, the cataloging documentation that we have for official RDA is quite limited. It only allows us to do what we're doing now. So that brings me to today's topic, and it took me 30 minutes to get to the point of today's presentation. I want to leave MARC behind. I want to look at official RDA as it could be expressed in BIBFRAME, and I want to look at those changes in official RDA that can actually change the course of cataloging. If we can let MARC behind, let it go, look at official RDA and these improved ways of expressing things, I think we are really on our way to a full linked data implementation scenario in a linked data environment, which is great. And so these are the things I want to look at. And I'm very grateful to a task group that I was on, and my task group members did the bulk of the work here on aggregate resources in official RDA. This is a big change in LRM, dealing with aggregates. So I want to point out some different ways that we could be doing aggregate resources in official RDA. In BIBFRAME, we could do them in MARC too, but I want to leave the MARC part behind. I just want to look at pure BIBFRAME today. So I'd like to look at complete works, partial compilations, translations, and maybe because of that mail carrier example that has always bothered me so much. But I want to look at two types, an aggregate translation and an individual translation. I'd like to talk a little bit about representative expression. That's a new thing in official RDA. Hasn't been tested yet. We've got some good guidance on how to do it, but we have not actually implemented it as a concept in PCC. I think we should. I'd like to talk about the possibilities there. I'm not a serials cataloger, so if you're a serials cataloger, you can just let me have it, but I want to give it an example of how the WEM block, what we call WEM block, which means what? Work, expression, manifestation lock, impacts serials in a totally new way from the way they've been done before, describing serials. And then the last thing, I want to talk about BIBFRAME hubs, because this is a big deal that we're looking here at the Library of Congress. We're not alone. Anyone working with linked data discusses this concept of superworks, or I think to really simplify it, think about an authority record for a work. You know, you don't create you don't describe a work alone in the bibliographic file. You just don't do it. You describe works as a discrete entity, or expressions as a discrete entity in the authority file. In BibFrame, we don't have an authority file. Everything's together. So I want to look at some possible ways that we could use work groups or BibFrame hubs to sort of solve that issue of not having a separate file for these types of entities. Okay, so I got 5 things to cover in an hour, but I want to leave plenty of time for questions. And Peggy, I'm not actually, or Jim, I'm not actually looking at the chat. Is there anything I should stop and address now?
I mean, there's a pretty extensive conversation going on. I don't know, Jim, what do you think?
There are questions. I think there's been a variety of threads. So now that you've brought us to your your focus, I think maybe we can proceed, and then we can see if these are still important to address later. But I think you've gotten to the point where I think you should just proceed, probably.
Okay, what I'll do, we'll save the chat, right? So I can, if the meeting, if the presentation ends, and I can review the chat and be sure to answer the questions after the meeting. Okay, so let's look at some things here in BibFrame. So under the LRM, the library reference model that sort of serves as the model behind official RDA, just as the Ferber models underlies original RDA, every aggregating work is a new work because it aggregates different expressions. So this is called the we lock. So this is at the work expression level. These are locked together. But for expediency, historically, complete works are considered one work. And the arguments they're reasonable too. The justification as well, the complete works of an agent are the complete works. They're static. That's one set of complete works. But the LRM is saying, no, not necessarily. You never know what expressions are actually aggregating into that work, into that complete works. Maybe someone has discovered some unknown works by this person, and those are included in a new set of complete works. So that means that this new set of complete works is different from the previous set of complete works. Now, the reason I believe, and this is not documented anywhere officially, that we've considered the complete works of an agent to be one work, is probably based on filing rules. So you can, in a flat search file, you can find all of the complete works of an agent together. But under official RDA, this might be a surprise to you. Conventional collective titles are not a part of the official toolkit anymore. They're in community resources, which you can get to in the toolkit, but they are not listed in the text of the toolkit itself and instructions in the toolkit. So they've been deferred. They've been taken out of the toolkit, and I can understand why. Think about conventional collective titles. What language are they in? They're always in English. Well, RDA is an international standard. Why would we allow an Anglo bias to appear in the instructions? So they rightfully appear in community resources, and in that place, they sort of codify past practices. But in addition to that, RDA does not give guidance on authorized access points. That's also left to the vocabulary encoding scheme, to you come up with the way that you want to express unauthorized access point. String encoding scheme, vocabulary encoding schemes, all of these things that we've used in MARC in the past to identify these authorized access points. So right off the bat, when we're thinking about complete works, well, you're thinking, well, I'm going to use the conventional collective title works, and I'll create an authority record, and I will give a variant from the manifestation title. So that will lead the user from the title proper to the authorized access point. But if you don't have a list in RDA of these conventional collective titles, what are you going to do? Well, you could say, follow community resources, go there, and probably that's what we may end up doing in PCC. Not sure yet how that's going to all play out. But RDA saves the day for us, official RDA, by having works as what is called a work group. And I love this phrase, work group, because if you think in linked data and in BIBFRAME, this is something similar to a hub or a super work or one of those pure theoretical entities of that abstract work entity, right? So you can consider the word works to be a part of a work group, and the definition in official RDA says a work group is a common appellation to collocate distinct works with common characteristics, which is exactly what complete works of an agent are. So we can do this in official RDA. And I would say here's one proposal that was made by the task group on aggregates. And this one tended to have the vote of the group. And in the future, when we finally implement official RDA as it's meant to be with all of these new terms and these new concepts, and ideally it will be in a BIBFRAME implementation, this is what the task group recommended. Treat all complete works as separate, static, determinate works. I mean, there's a lot of jargon, official RDA jargon here. Use the work group designation works plus some sort of differentiation, year, publisher, you decide, cataloger's judgment. Add syntax information. So that means we need to codify this somehow in the metadata guidance documents. Right now, we don't talk about this because this is a new concept. This has not been implemented in PCC. It definitely should, but right now it hasn't. So we're going to have to add information to the MGDs. And then this is my addition here, make them orphan works with no reference to related works or representative expressions. Well, representative expressions, which I'm going to talk about in a second, are difficult with aggregates because you can't really, the representative expression is based on the expressions that are aggregated and not on the aggregate resource itself. So that's very theoretical. I usually can't talk theory very well, but that one I know. So, but I would call these orphan works. Okay, so let's look at this how this could be implemented in BIBFRAME. So I just use screenshots. So in case the editor breaks down, but I'm happy to go to the editor if we have time later. So I'm at the level of hub here because this is a super, I'm considering this a super work. This is a super work. And I can go to the, click to the official RDA toolkit by the link here. And we're using, this is the example that we used in our task group report, Dante's works. Okay, so I have a creator, person, relationship is the author. And here the preferred title of the work is the work group title works, qualified by the year of publication. Okay, we don't have Mark here, so we don't have to worry about F or S or any other subfield code that people agonize over in Mark when you're using this type of differentiation. So the preferred title is Works 1894. Now, I'm going to propose a possibility of actually relating that to a related work of work to the super conceptual concept of all of Dante's works at the abstract level. So I have made a reference to this work hub here, works with no further qualification. This represents all of the works in any publication ever expressed, right, or manifested. We don't have to do this, but this exists as a heading or as an authority record right now. So I'm trying to make use of that in a more semantic way than we would in Mark. So something to think about. I'm not lobbying for this especially, but we really don't even have a relationship element that we could use here. So I'm just letting the element itself satisfy the need for identifying the type of relationship. But so let me summarize this before I go on to the second one. The complete works of an agent in LRM, each expression of the complete works it becomes a different work because of the we-lock. The we-lock impacts that. So that's a change from what we're doing now. And so I think we need to be aware of that and see how it plays out. Okay, now for translations, we're going to look at two types. Let's stick with aggregates because that's where we started. We started with an aggregate work. And same thing here, we-lock. For aggregate resources, translations are inherently new works because the aggregating expressions are different. So you don't have an expression of the work, you have a new work. And that's wonderful from linked data because it means you can use the title of the translation as the preferred title. And this is exactly what has been tested in TCC with this conventional collective title policy, where we are no longer using those conventional collective titles and we're allowing the manifestation titles or the instance titles in BibFrame to rise to the level of discrete titles that can be actionable. They're not subsumed as variants. They're actually become the title that represents the resource. Could this have happened under original RDA? No, and this is one of what I see, and you may disagree with me, but one of the big failings in original RDA that we saw when we went to BibFrame was that original RDA says that you identify an expression by using an authorized access point. And that authorized access point is the authorized access point for the work plus some sort of distinguishing or some attribute of the expression that identifies the authorized access point for the expression. There is no place in original RDA that says title of expression. We don't have it. It doesn't exist. So you could not have done this under original RDA. In official RDA, though, here's the teaser on this one. When you are dealing with aggregates that are translated, it's very easy to say, oh, this is a translation of this. But look at the modeling here. If the WELOC kicks in, which it does, and the translation of an aggregate resource is a new work, then we are really required to represent the relationship at the work level. So we would use related work of work to show the relationship between the original aggregate, original language aggregate, and the translation aggregate. This is getting a little bit geeky here, but if the model, I mean, my observation from original RDA is that we took so many shortcuts that obfuscated the model that I'm all for a pure implementation of official RDA in this case, and related work of work is how you would relate these two distinct works. So here's the example for the cricket sings. So this is actually a translation of a aggregate resource of poems by Garcia Lorca. The preferred title, because this is a new work, right? We can use the title proper, the manifestation title, Cricket Sings, and then we can relate that as related work of work. Now, I went to search because I wanted to show the relationship to the original language, and I'm going to look this up in Marga, and I realized, we don't have it. It's the original is not represented in the file. Now this is a screenshot, so I can't really make it too big, but you can see that the original language expression is not in the file. So what do? And here's a perfect way to further provide access. You can create a representative expression for that original language expression as a work hub. And then that shows the relationship between the two. But the point is, the relationships in this example are at the work level. So work to work, because you have the WELOC has kicked in, you have two separate works, even though they're really related because they're just translations. And you think, I think just common sense says, oh boy, there's such a strong relationship between a translation and the original work. But it's just that it is a strong relationship, but it's just at the work level, not at the expression level as it has been under original RDA. Okay, so how could you do this in, let's see, I think, this is an individual one. Now, we didn't look at this in the task group because our charge was to look at aggregate works. But some colleagues at the Library of Congress and I have been having informal discussions about this. And I'm proposing, and I think I'm representing the views of the small group that I've been working with, that this type of modeling, that now that we can acknowledge that an expression can have a title of its own, can change the way we describe translations. And I'm talking about an individual work here, not an aggregate. We're down to the individual work itself. How could we do this in BIBFRAME and in official RDA? Well, now we have the translation of relationship, which would be correct, because when we're looking at an individual work as opposed to an aggregate work, the relationship is expression to expression. We've moved down because the fact that it's not an aggregate any longer. So you have either of these options. And what most people would do, okay, so what do I have here? This is the Korean translation of Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale. And we're at the expression level here. Now you might argue with me on this one, and this is where I'd love to get some feedback. We do have in official RDA creator agent of expression. See, expressions have become, official RDA has done so much more to make expressions relatable. I mean, in official RDA, expressions just sort of were so dependent on the work, but now they can sort of stand on their own. They're much stronger as an entity in official RDA. So we definitely have the creator agent person Margaret Atwood. Here is the title of the translation. We wouldn't do this now, would we? We would put Handmaid's Tale Korean. And we put a variant from this, but now this has been elevated to the level of a distinct title, a discrete title that we can use for this translation. But what about the relationship? If you think about the way we have done it by putting the original work and then the language Korean and then possibly an additional element to identify the distinct translation in Korean, because there are more than one translation of Handmaid's Tale into Korean, and they can be uniquely identified. That was filing. That was filing so that you would have the original work followed by all the translations of the work in different languages and within those separate languages, distinct other distinguishing characteristics that could identify specific translations. But in a linked data environment, filing is like, why? Why are we doing this legacy? Why are we doing filing still? There's a better way to express this relationship, and that is at the related work, or this could be a related expression. So, I mean, this is where I've gone to a different profile here because I'm still playing around with this because I wanted to get feedback from everyone. But this is where the relationship can be expressed here, not through a 240 field with an artificial title with Anglo-centric additions added to it to identify the language or the form. This is much more international, and this is, from a linked data perspective in BibFrame, a much better way to identify a translation. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about representative expression. So I like the concept of representative expression because it does solve the conflation of work and the original language expression of the work, which we've proliferated since we implemented RDA in 2012. It does it for textual resources, but it can work for any type of work. It doesn't have to be a textual resource. Specific elements can be added to the work descriptions to identify the canonical expression. And so I think you all have a really good sense of this, even though we haven't done a good job of bringing this out. So if we look at that mail carrier example from earlier on, where I felt that, that first analytical authorized access point was very confusing because I couldn't tell if that was the work or the original language expression, because we were letting that one authorized access point serve as both. Using representative expression, you could create that authority record, and you wouldn't need to qualify it with anything in the authorized access point. But you could put in the description, and that's what I've done here. Let's see. Oh gosh, I lost my. Oh no, here it is. In the work hub, in this profile that I created for Marva, I have all of the elements that go with work, right? The ones that we would normally use. Not all of them here, but generally the ones that traditionally are added in PCC cataloging. But then at the bottom of this same profile, I've added the representative expression elements. So color content of representative expression, content type. This is default because I created this as a monograph, so it's going to be text. Date of representative expression, extent of representative expression, intended audience, language of representative expression. So here's where you could create that mail carrier example and put English here to say, hey, this work was originally expressed in English, and that is so important. That language element is so important to the work itself as the original language expression, that the language rises to the level of the work through representative expression. So this is a fantastic way to end that conflation between the work and the original language expression. So you can add others there. You can add others. So, but you have uniquely identified both the work and elements of the original expression that actually constitute that are so closely tied to the work itself. Now I'm using a text example, but if you work in different formats, especially if you're a music cataloger, deal with sound recordings, notated music, the ability to do this is critical, and this is so much more helpful to describing resources based on those formats. So I'm excited to see this implemented. We already have looked at some elements of this in terms of series, and Bob Maxwell at BYU has done some amazing work to start experimenting with representative expression. It does need further input from PCC and some guidance, but it's a huge step forward towards making cataloging much clearer and getting rid of that horrible conflation between work and expression. So I'm proposing that in BibFrame, a representative expression could rise to the level of a hub, and that's why I added those elements in the hub. We call it a BibFrame hub. It's really a work, but it's a BibFrame work and an RDA work at the same time. But it can also have elements of RDA expression and still be a BibFrame work, and I'll talk more about that because of this somewhat difficult vocabulary conflict or ontological makeup between the models behind BibFrame and behind RDA. Okay, now serials catalogers, hopefully you're still keeping up with me, because if I make a mistake, I want you to point this out. Serials catalogers are a special group, right? And I'm certainly not a member of that group, but I made sure that I'm using a very straightforward example. So thank you, colleagues Melanie and Jackie. So serials, we have what we looked at the wheelock with aggregate resources, right? So when you have the complete works, all complete works are distinct works because the aggregating content is different. Well, with serials, the lock is even tighter. We go down to the manifestation level. So now it's called the WEM lock. And this is even more strict than the wheelock, obviously. So why do we have the WEM lock? Well, serials are diachronic, so content, identifying elements, language, content type are likely to diverge. It's a given that they're going to diverge. It's a given. You just assume that they will. So there is a strong cardinality between work, expression, and manifestation. All relationships are locked at the work level. This is a huge, huge, huge change. And I want the concert community, I'm encouraging the concert community to think about the implications of this change, because as a not a serials cataloger, I see a strong potential here, but we cannot just ignore the past. I mean, there needs to always be a middle ground between the way we have done things and the way we will do things. But this is an area where concert will have to look at things and really investigate the modeling behind all of this. I would love to see, but this is totally off the wall. I mean, I would love to see concert as a group implement official RDA and test this out, because serial works are so complex, but they're also contained. You know, they have their own separate database, the concert database. So from an experimental standpoint, working with data that's so tightly controlled and in one silo like that, it's a wonderful opportunity. But unlike the way all of us in PCC are working with so many different formats across generally through OCLC, but not always. And it's harder to come up with a pilot when you've got such a broad, disparate amount of data. But concert seems perfect for this type of experimentation. So I'm encouraging the concert community to play around with it. So what does the WEM lock, what are the WEM lock's implications in BibFrame? Well, preferred title of work, we have this Spanish title. And because all relationships are at the work level because of the WEM lock, you have a related work Oh, sorry, I got to change this. This is my fault. This is the English language title for the work that's actually in the catalog already. So we've shown the relationship work to work, and this is different from the way we would do it in a MARC record right now. So I'll change this slide. I think I was rushing to get this one done this morning. So, and I'm always I get cold feet when I hear the word serials. So, okay. The last thing I want to talk about is hubs, and how are we going to reconcile this ontological difference between the Ferber and LRM model, where we have works and expressions? Let's just leave it at those two. Works and expressions that need to map to BIBFRAME work. So it's 2-to-1. And in MARC, I finally brought up MARC again. I've been trying to stay away from the word MARC, but here's where MARC has actually made things a little bit easier, for the reason that I mentioned a while ago, that if you want to describe a work or an expression uniquely, without including elements of a manifestation or an item, like you would in a bibliographic record, you would go to the authority file. You would create an authority record for that work or for that expression, and that would be a unique description of that specific entity. But in BIBFRAME, whether it's a work or an expression, it's going to be a BIBFRAME work. And so I'm trying to come up with ways, and people have been talking about this for years, and there are many different approaches to how to do this. But this concept of a work hub, or some developers call it opus or super work, it's this sort of like elevated entity in BIBFRAME that sort of allows the modeling to be more one-to-one. So a work in Ferber or in LRM becomes a hub or a super work in BIBFRAME. An expression or a work with representative expression elements becomes a work hub in BIBFRAME. And then it takes you down. That means that when you're working with bibliographic description, what are you actually cataloging? You're including work elements, you're including expression elements, but you're cataloging a manifestation. So can the real work of description in BIBFRAME take place at that instance level? And then all of the relationships that you have between work and expression, or hub or work in BIBFRAME, all are behind the scenes. So when you pull up a MARC template and you begin, I don't know, everyone has a different workflow, but I used to, when I catalog, I start at the top and I go down the fields. I analyze the resource. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to put is the creator's name, and I'm going to put the title. And so already at that point, well, creator, that's at the work level. Title is both work and manifestation, because unless there's a 240, and then I'm into the work or expression. So I'm just going down this list and not really thinking about each entity, right? But in BIBFRAME, really the important part is describing that resource and showing the relationship. So I'm proposing that the critical description is the transcription of manifestation data or instance data, and then those relationships. A lot of them are inherent. A lot of them you have to express in textual ways or through URIs, but that you actually input. Those are underpinnings of what you're actually describing. So we put so much importance on works and expressions, but I think it's more the relationships that those have, and those can be dealt with in semantic ways without catalogers doing that much. We still have to describe them, but I think I'm repeating myself, but I'd like to point out what I see in official RDA implementation is the importance of being able to show those as relationships as not as discrete entities that I'm describing. So I think that will help if we can elevate the RDA expressions and works to the level of work hub in BibFrame. You can make the bridge from thinking, oh, well, I would have done this in the authority file in Mark, but now I can do this at the hub level in BibFrame. So that could help with resolving that conflict between the modeling. Okay, yeah, I think I covered that with this slide. Now, would that make semantic sense? I don't know. We need to play around with it. We need to experiment and see where things go. Okay, so I'm getting down to the end here. This is the last couple of slides. So what's next? We haven't implemented official RDA yet. That's down the road, probably this year, maybe next year. Not sure. It hasn't been determined. But we are testing official RDA right now using current cataloging policies. So everything that you just heard me say, forget about when it comes to the RDA test, because those are all things that are in the future. We're not testing those now. They will come, and I think they need to come, but we're not at that point yet. So what we're hoping to find out from the test is where there are difficulties when expressing RDA data in Mark. And I know there are already a lot of difficulties because I've pointed a lot of them out, but you probably know of other difficulties. And when we look at that data from the test, I would like, if I was reviewing the data, I would think to myself, well, is this a Mark problem or is this an RDA problem? And I bet you the answer is going to be it's a Mark problem. And so I would guess that BibFrame can make much more semantic sense in that given situation, and I would model it to BibFrame. I do that all the time, and it's amazing how that helps you see through Mark. It puts everything in a different perspective when you think of it in BibFrame terms. So what I would like to see then is pilot official RDA in BibFrame. And so this is what the Library of Congress is hoping to do. As I said, we want to train all of our catalogers in BibFrame before we train them in official RDA, because of that semantic, the increased semantic understanding that BibFrame brings to LRM data and RDA data. And then we want to test out these new aspects, all the things that I just talked about, the aggregates, the translations, representative expression, WEMLOC, talk about those and see how those can be implemented in BibFrame. Or in Mark even, but they make so much semantic sense in BibFrame, those things that I just went through. I'd like to lobby for those changes, those examples that I just showed you, to make them official. We have a lot of legacy data that is impacted. There's always a big price to pay when something changes. But if the change is for the good, the future is greater than the past, we move on. Someday, we will not need to be held back by Mark. We'll be working hopefully in a pure linked data environment where the legacy data can exist, but it doesn't need to be integrated as it does right now. I would like to see a balance struck between RDA's granularity, and maybe granularity is a kind way of saying weight. Official RDA has so many elements, and just looking at the relationship labels, thousands and thousands and thousands. And so we need to strike a balance for PCC work, which I think we've done a really good job with so far. But that's looking at Mark. But I would like to see that move to BibFrame as well. And this balance between the heaviness of RDA and the granularity, and BIBFRAME's what I call it agility. Agility. What I mean by that is that BIBFRAME really is not meant to express one cataloging code only. It's meant to accommodate many codes. So it's not going to go way down deep like a standalone cataloging code will. BIBFRAME can certainly accommodate official RDA, and the mappings need to be done. And just in creating this profile that I showed you a while ago, some of the initial mappings are there, but we still need to do some more work on the mapping between the two. And then test with catalogers who are not familiar at all with MARC. This is always fascinating to me that if you ever work with a cataloger, like you have a new cataloger on staff and that cataloger has no cataloging background, they would take to BIBFRAME so easily, I guarantee it. It's when you have worked in MARC and you map that to BIBFRAME that everything becomes confusing. So this is my last slap at MARC, I'm afraid, but MARC has, on its own is fine, but to relate it to other ontologies or other vocabularies, it doesn't work well at all. So MARC has been a real problem. You can probably think of lots of other next steps too. And if you haven't looked at the official toolkit yet, why don't I suggest that you play around with it and try it out. Now, yeah, that was my last slide. Now, one thing I want to, let me see if I can go back to, and I think I noticed that Jackie put a link in, but I had a, yeah, here on this one. This is the slideshow. Okay, so Marva, the linked data editor that that I showed you today is available outside. Here's the link. I think Jackie put it into the chat. You can play around with it. Now, the profile that I did today, that I showed you for the RDA, official RDA, is only on our test server because it's not ready for public use. I need to work on that a lot. I was just putting it together, just having a lot of fun experimenting with what might be. So it's not ready for prime time. But you certainly are welcome to go to Marva and play around with our existing profiles that are based on original RDA here, and then there are hubs. You can create hubs here and think about how hubs might be able to be used in cataloging. And then I'm going to challenge anyone who works with Sinopia. And this is, I have to apologize here because I really wanted to show how this might work in Sinopia as well. But I thought, let me try to get some feedback from just using the LC Marva version. But anyone out there, you can get it's free. You can request the Sinopia account, and you could play around in Sinopia and try the modeling and see how official RDA might be used in Sinopia. So I wanted to be sure you saw those two links. Sinopia is amazing. I'm just used to Marva, the BIBFRAME editor. It's like, here we are again, like, it's, do you do your authority work in OCLC or do you do your authority work in the ILS Voyager like we do? I mean, you're doing the same thing, but you're just using a different interface to do it. So Sinopia can do just as much as the LC editor, maybe even more in some cases, because there's been so much more iterative development on Sinopia. But both of these editors are freely available for you all for everyone to play around with. And I think I am going to close. I'm sorry I went a little bit over, but I think we have 15 minutes. Jim, Peggy, Steve, are there any questions that I really need to address right now?
Yeah, we have well, Paul, thanks so much for sharing your expertise. First of all, really, really great. A number of threads, and I started to try to collect them into themes. this will necessarily work our way backwards, but so I'll start with the theme around like works hubs. One question was work hubs, they're not an RDA entity, so can we code records that use them as RDA?
Yeah, I think we could. We just need to map them to RDA, map them from BibFrame to RDA. They really are RDA works. They can be RDA works, work hubs. They can also be RDA expressions, but it's all in the mapping between the ontologies that is resolved. So yeah, I think we could. We definitely could.
And then thanks so much. Continuing on that theme, a question about how one would position Ferber LRM works to BibFrame hubs. The question specifically is it safe to equate those?
Well, I think it's safe to do, but what you don't want is when you can have a one-to-many and not a one-to-one. And with BibFrame hubs, they can potentially represent three different things and three different things from RDA. So you could have, well, actually two separate things from RDA and then one that's like above all of it. So they could represent RDA works, they could represent RDA expressions, and then they could represent this like super umbrella work that would not even be supported by an expression or a manifestation, but just serves as a collocation above the works and the expressions. And that concept, I don't think exists in official RDA, but it exists as a tool in modeling for BibFrame and in and any other group outside LC that's working with this BibFrame type description is dealing with this entity. Now, where there's a difference, and this is what needs to be resolved, are what are the attributes of that super work, and actually, what are the attributes of a BibFrame hub? Because a hub can be, what are you trying to do with the hub? Are you trying to collocate, or are you trying to differentiate? And this is the big problem that conventional collective titles have had all these years, is because they serve both purposes. They bring things together and they distinguish things at the same time. So can this modeling from LRM work in BibFrame using hubs? I would say yes, including this idea of a super work, but the key is in the mappings from one to another. And we don't really, I would love to hear from anyone who's done a official RDA mapping to BibFrame. That's how we started with original RDA. When we first started the BibFrame pilot, we worked with existing mappings that Joe Kegel had done at the University of Washington. And it was definitely a community approach. But as far as I know, I do not believe that we have any well-developed mappings from BibFrame, from RDA, official RDA to BibFrame yet. So these are the issues that we need to work through when we get to when we start looking at that mapping.
Thanks. It looks like Crystal put a link into the work that University of Washington has.
Oh, great. That would be great. Thanks, Crystal.
Yeah. And I believe there is a session later on that later this week. Thanks. Lots of questions about hubs. I think you've touched on a lot that people had, but I think there's still questions about it, like where did kind of where the, like, how would you relate sort of a hub to a work? Is the hub a subclass of the work?
Well, it could be. That's a good question. I'm trying to envision it. Subclass of work. Yeah, it could be a subclass of work if you interpret official RDA or even Ferber as with the work being an abstract entity. Once you're at the abstract level, then what's above the abstract, right? So if you look at it purely from that abstraction level, then the hub does sort of could serve as a subclass of work. But the way traditionally we've been using works is that they can be used as access points. And so that to me is somewhat of a violation of that abstraction level. But I tend to get, this is something that really I harp on quite a bit, and I think I could be convinced otherwise, but I could see that a work hub is a subclass of RDA work in a pure sense, but from an implementation scenario, I don't really think it is.
Yeah, Nate's on chat and he said it's an RDF type of a work.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Nate.
So thank you. I'm going to switch gears a little just to make sure we can address some of the earlier questions. There were a lot of questions about the work expression lock, WeLock, unlock. I guess I'll go back to some fundamentals and then maybe some detailed questions. The first was, what can we actually, what's to be gained by sort of this WE lock for aggregates?
I think it's it could be a modeling discussion, a modeling topic. So much of modeling doesn't look at expediency, and catalogers, I have to admit that catalogers have made expedient decisions all along, and there is an inherent conflict between expediency and modeling, but I think I'm really struggling for words here because I probably can't answer this question very well, but I would think that the WeLock, especially when it impacts aggregate resources in a linked data environment, allows much more flexibility. And I can see the advantages there. Where there is a legacy problem is taking all of the existing work records that aren't for aggregates that are not in, pre-official RDA before WeLock, and converting those and changing those to a WeLock scenario. So there's a very good chance that things might continue as they are because of this legacy data, but from a modeling and a discovery standpoint, having these as discrete works, I think does serve users much better, and linked data makes it a lot easier to do that than it would be in a marked environment.
Okay. And then, so you had a couple of slides, or at least one focus slide on representative expressions. There's a question on how to represent multilingual books or books immediately published in more than one language.
Okay, those are going to be, I don't think actually that will change. The policy on that would be, that is an aggregate resource, and it would have, you would choose, oh boy, I didn't think about this one. I hadn't thought about that. Who asked that question? Because I want to get back to that person.
I don't recall now.
Okay, well, if I can get the chat, I'll find, was it in the chat?
It is in the chat, yeah.
Yeah, if I get a copy of the chat, I'll go through, because I want to make sure I covered everything that's, I see a lot of chat messages.
There are quite a few. Yeah, I don't know, Stephen or Peggy, if you see some that I overlooked, please chime in. I think there's a lot more conversation that could be had here. Let me double check.
Hi, Paul. It's me, Joy, who asked the bilingual original text, but I'm doing so similar. I didn't know that it would be a similar presentation on what I'm working with data modeling later this week.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Joy. Yeah, let me get back to you because, I'm thinking we have that example in the policy statement. It comes right after the one, the mail carrier one on those multilingual publications. And I want to review that policy because I'm pretty sure it will go into official RDA the same way. But I'll respond to you after I take a look.
Thank you.
Well, I think we might want to start wrapping up because I just think there's so much discussion to be had that none of it can be had in 4 minutes. So thank you so much, Paul, for this presentation. Let me put up the link to the Slack channel if people want to use that as a way to continue the discussion. Here's how you join the Slack channel for the conference. Again, here is the link to this is the recording will be, I don't know if it shows up immediately, it's live streaming right now. I think it'll be immediate and you can see all the other presentations from this conference as well. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for the lively conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. Thanks, everyone.
Peggy or Jim, can you click save the chat?
Sure.
Because I got kicked out. I only have up until when I logged back in.
Let's see. How do I do that?
It's just under your chat, there's like the 3 ... If you click on that, the top.
Gotcha. I see it. Thank you.
I've got a copy too if you.
Okay, cool.
But that's great.
And can you confirm that it goes back to the beginning and not to where I logged back in?
Mine goes back to 10:04.
Awesome. Good. I was worried that. Yeah. I think I'm gonna end up with 2 recordings with maybe a minute where I was kicked out that won't be covered in the recording unless YouTube does something fancy and keeps it as a recording afterwards.
I think the stream is what's recorded, so I think we'll be okay, but I'll double check.
Okay, cool. Thank you.